I want to create a playlist um, of short videos dealing with individual passages in the Christian scriptures, and then I want to pose it to the viewer, the question whether the passage in question was more likely spoken by Jesus of the New Testament or the Emperor Titus Flavius of history contemporaneous to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So we have these figures all from the first century. We have Jesus, Jesus, Joshua, Yehoshua. People pronounce his name in so many different ways, but one thing is certain, and that is that there was no hard J sound in either Greek or Hebrew back then. I don't even know if there is now, but definitely not back then. And so the way his name is pronounced, Jesus, these days is just an impossibility, and yet Christians will tell us there is, and the Christian scriptures assert that there is no other name under heaven by which man can get saved. Anyway, we have no idea what this person looks like. We have very little, if any, historical corroboration of the man's existence. There are some, I can think of at least one apocryphal description of his appearance that seemed to have been written by a monk or something who must have been gay for the idea of the man, or maybe just gay, period. The way he described him is like he was describing a woman. Anyway, just by a cursory read of the thing, it was obvious that the work was apocryphal, and yet here on YouTube I think you see people covering it as if it's some reliable source. I mean, you've got people on YouTube who are so poorly studied that they can't even discern which works are canonical or dependable or reliable or authoritative and which aren't. Anyway, so we don't know what this person looks like, and that results in lots of racist, divisive debate. You've got Afrocentric people who are suggesting that he was black, or asserting outright that he was black, and that the white man is trying to take Jesus away from them, appropriate their culture. You've got white supremacists who think that Jesus was white. This all despite the fact that he was supposed to have been, according to the accounts, a Jew, and yet no one even really looks to find out what Jews look like in the first century. And there is a source for that. The Mishnah actually states in a oblique way, like it's not even dwelling upon the fact of Jewish skin color, but it states, as it's treating the signs of leprosy, basically skin malady, and the colors of the symptoms of leprosy, it it says that you at one end of the spectrum you've basically got like Teutonic people. I forget what the word it uses is, but the translation I think refers to something close to the Germanic people, and it says that they're really white. And then at the other end you've got Ethiopians, suggesting that they're really black. And then it says that the children of Israel are an intermediate shade, that they are the color of boxwood, which is the color of many native Israelis in Israel today. But it never occurs to these agents of duality who are either pushing for the white Jesus or pushing for the black Jesus that there might actually be intermediate shades in the Mediterranean, and that the children of Israel might have actually been an intermediate shade. Anyway, another figure from this period is the Emperor Nero, which the word Nero means black. And this is, I think, a suggestion of also the Afrocentric activists that Nero was also black, and this is just another evidence that all of all of civilized history has been black and just whitewashed by white people. But anyway, his name meant black, and he was also called the first Antichrist by the church. I'm not sure who it was who called him that, but it was fairly well known that he was the first Antichrist, so that you have some people pointing out that the letters of his name actually add up to 666, and they talk about how he died and how that fulfills, prophecy in the book of Revelation, etc. Anyway, he's an important figure from the time period. I'll describe why in a moment. Then you have the Emperor Vespasian, and apparently his birth name is Titus Flavius Vespasianus. And then I put that his code name is the Father in Heaven. And he was a Roman general who was allegedly, according to Flavius Josephus, I'll show you like a little sketch of Flavius Josephus right here. I guess this must be him when he was shaved as a Roman POW, if he was shaved. Anyway, this is some sketch of him. I don't know how accurate that is. I doubt that it's very accurate. It's probably just something created for a book. And then I guess this is another sketch here, but they almost seem to represent like a stereotypical Pharisee or something, which I think Flavius Josephus was supposed to be of the Pharisaical line. I don't know, and maybe even descended from the priests. I forget exactly. But some suggest that maybe Josephus didn't even actually exist, but that he was just a character ghost written by the Romans to present a Roman history with a Jewish flavor. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't find that to be a central question, because whether the history came from the Romans ghostwriting a Jew saying these things, or whether it came from an actual Jewish POW under Roman custody, the end result is kind of the same. It's a history that you have to read critically. If you take it at face value, you're kind of naive, kind of stupid, and but at the same time, if it's a history that you totally discount and don't pay any attention to, simply because of the fact that you think it's unreliable, then you're missing out on a whole lot of evidence from that time period, and you're basically remaining willfully ignorant. There's a lot of really good information in Flavius Josephus, as I hope to point out. So back to our main figures. And anyway, so Nero, the Emperor Nero, allegedly sent Vespasian and his son Titus to Galilee and Judea to put down the rebellion against Rome there, where already the supposedly the Jewish zealots had devastated an entire legion of the Roman army, and had confiscated or captured that legion's Aquila, which is their like golden eagle standard that their army would march before the legion, you know, as they were on the move. So apparently this was as it would be for any military unit, to have your standard captured by an enemy unit is considered shameful. Just like if the American flag was captured by a Roman army. So he sent Vespasian, allegedly, and then Vespasian wanted Titus to come along. Now Vespasian had already put down a rebellion in Britannica, I think is the name. Britannia, maybe? I don't know. Basically England, you know, Britain. So he had already been involved in a significant war there. So his son Titus, this name, by the way, means dove, as I'll show. And this was something that Joseph Atwill pointed out, is that in this book, Our Italian Surnames, by Joseph Guerin something, I'd have to page back to show you his full name, unless it's at the top. No, it's not. Anyway, on page 130, it's pointed out that the Romans enjoyed conferring bird names upon their fellow men, such as Titus, dove; Gaius, magpie; Gallus, rooster; Gracchus or Graculus, a daw. I don't know what kind of bird that is. Passer means sparrow. Corvus or Corvinus means raven. Aquila, falco, and Marula mean eagle, hawk, and blackbird, respectively, all of which were used by well-known families. So we see there that Titus means dove, or at least it did to this author, who seems to have known what he was talking about. Also, it does say that the giving of bird names to persons is a universal practice which is probably as old as the human race. In Hebrew, Zipporah means bird, and Jonah means dove. So back to our guys. So not only does Titus in Roman mean dove, but also Jonah in Hebrew means dove. And this is important in the Gospels. So Wikipedia says that his birth name is exactly the same as for Vespasian, Titus Flavius Vespasianus. Now, I don't know if that might be why the I think it's the Jerusalem Talmud, or otherwise known as the Palestinian Talmud, says that Vespasian was at the siege of Jerusalem. I'm not sure if Vespasian actually got as far as the siege of Jerusalem before he went to Rome to become emperor. Anyway, if Vespasian the father was never at Jerusalem during its siege, it may be because of that the Jerusalem Talmud still reports that Vespasian was at the siege of Jerusalem. It might be because they both have the same name, both father and son, because Titus definitely was, according to the history, at the siege of Jerusalem in either 69 or 70 CE. Anyway, I also call Titus the beloved son for the reason that Titus, Joseph Atwill asserts in his book Caesar's Messiah. Here's a picture of the cover: Caesar's Messiah, the Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus by Joseph Atwill. There are actually videos, documentary type videos on YouTube, which you can watch for free, about the Caesar's Messiah thesis and I think it's called the Flavian hypothesis, which another person by the name of Cliff Carrington also subscribed to and had posted on, I think, his own website about how the Roman Flavian dynasty was, that they were the inventors of the Christian myth. Anyway, so my studies that led to my accepting this thesis, and I'll talk later about my independent discoveries which support that thesis, was that I was fairly fluent in the Christian scriptures, and then in the late 90s I read first I read a book in the mid-90s called Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls by Barbara Thiering. Now, I don't know how Barbara Thiering arrived at many of the ideas she did in her book, but her method at least opened up a way of thinking to me that kind of prepared me to be ready for other ideas. Like she basically opened up the idea that, hey, maybe what you're reading in the Christian scriptures isn't meant to be taken at face value, but maybe there's something underlying that's going on there. So then, when in the late 90s, I finally bought a copy of James, the Brother of Jesus, after seeing a lot of talk about it online. James, the Brother of Jesus, really does talk about how various terms in the Christian scriptures and how they're used, and also in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and how they're used are really important. And I've always kind of been of this opinion that that literal translations are better than was it figurative, or forget the other kind of translation, a paraphrase, that's it, a paraphrase translation. Because even if it's using an idiom or a euphemism or something, I want to know what those words are that it's using literally, right? And then my brain can translate the idiom or the euphemism into the modern equivalent, right? It's like when I was learning Spanish, their word for outdoors, or the words that I was taught for outdoors had nothing to do with a door or being outside, right? So when I was looking for those words that I had already learned about a door and about being outside, I couldn't find them in the words that they were using for outdoors. They were paraphrasing what the actual Spanish was, because the actual Spanish was something closer to "in the free air." And I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Why didn't you just tell me that in the first place? In the free air. In the free air. Yeah, I get that. That's outdoors. That's where the air is free. So, I always prefer a literal translation, and James, the Brother of Jesus, his a book by Robert Eisenman, really shows why it's so important to stick with literal translations when you're talking about these sometimes esoteric concepts, right? That are in really not just the Christian scriptures, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha, intertestamental literature, and the Hebrew Tanakh. So we can just close these now. However, this is a really sizable book. It's pretty lengthy, lots of footnotes, and it's very repetitive, and it's kind of hard to get through, but it's packed with so much gold. There are just veins of gold throughout that book that you can mine to better understand the real context of the writing of the Christian scriptures. So back to our guys, the real context is that in the first century, Galilee and Judea, they were occupied by the Romans, and Jewish laws were not the same as Roman laws. Romans, they didn't have any problems with worshiping multiple gods, and they certainly weren't worshiping the God of the Hebrews. Now, Romans, not having a problem with worshiping multiple gods, they might have adopted the Hebrew God, and I'm not saying that Jesus is, I'm just saying that he is supposedly representative of the Jewish culture at the time, and I'm here to tell you no, he's not. Anyway, so on the one hand you had Jewish laws, Jewish values, Jewish ethics, Jewish culture, and then on the other hand you had Gentile laws, Gentile culture, Gentile values and ethics. And for Jews, the two were not to mix, at least not in a intermarriage kind of way, unless the Gentile wanted to convert to Judaism. Now, when Emperor Vespasian, he wasn't emperor yet, he was a general then, General Vespasian, and I guess Titus could be called maybe a general then too, I'm not sure. When this father and son team of Roman men of war, not princes of peace, but men of war, the exact opposite, when they move into Galilee and Judea to make war with the Jews, they're killing not just Jewish men, but Jewish women and children. They're lobbing huge stones into these cities and squashing Jewish women and children. And they're not really having that much of a problem with doing so. All they know is that the said town appears to be rebelling against Roman authority, and they're there to squash that rebellion. Doesn't matter who gets squashed. And then that's supposedly when Josephus gets captured as a POW and then is there to witness the succeeding events that eventually result in the sacking of Jerusalem, or the breaching of Jerusalem's walls, and the destruction of the temple by Titus, by the way. Everybody knows Titus as Titus the Destroyer because he's the one who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. So let's see if I've missed anything here. So Caesar's Messiah is the thesis, or Cliff Carrington's Flavian hypothesis, which I don't know if it's word for word or even idea for idea the same as the Caesar's Messiah thesis, but it is a second witness, if you will, of what kinds of shenanigans the Flavians were involved in. Now, another important thing to consider is that Nero was a Julio-Claudian emperor. Now, when he ceased being emperor, it resulted in a kind of tumultuous time where the throne moved from one person to another in quick succession, relatively quick succession, and the empire was kind of unstable. That's what is reported. And it was at this time that the Roman legions, led by Vespasian and Titus, they were kind of anxious about what's going on with the empire right now when they heard news. And it was then that they put forth that Vespasian should become emperor. And supposedly, Flavius Josephus also suggested that Vespasian was the fulfillment of the star prophecy in the Torah that a star shall come out of Jacob, which how this guy, I mean, it would have to be Jacob as a geographical reference, not Jacob as a racial reference. Because Vespasian didn't, he's not an Israelite. He's not a Jew. He can't represent Jacob in that way, so maybe Josephus was saying that the star coming out of Jacob being a reference to Israel and a reference to the land. So he's saying that this is a fulfillment of Vespasian's becoming emperor. So anyway, Vespasian does go to Rome to become emperor, and then meanwhile Titus is left behind. He's entrusted to carry out the rest of this war against the Jews. So you can imagine like the considerable trust he placed in this son. Now, this wasn't Vespasian's only son. There was also Domitian, who succeeded. Okay, first Vespasian was emperor, then Titus succeeded him, and then Domitian succeeded Titus. So, bam, 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 father and two sons were all emperor of the Roman Empire in succession. I'm being a little redundant in my wording, but my apologies. So, Titus is the beloved son, and I get the feeling that Domitian may not have been as favored as Titus was by Vespasian. And I think there's definitely, I think whereas Vespasian and Titus were of one mind on things, I think Domitian was he had a very different outlook on things, I think. Maybe as like the put out son, there was maybe some resentment there. Anyway, while these two were in Galilee and Judea, I believe that they began the writing of the Gospels. And it should be noted that these two, as emperors of Rome, were worshipped as the Roman state god. So in Roman eyes, both of these men were God. So there's a little bit of your Trinity right there. First the Father was God, then the Son was God. Also, when we see that these men's names, their birth names are exactly the same, it kind of brings up words like, he who has seen me has seen the Father also, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in John about that we could dwell on, but not right now. At the other end, we've got this literary figure, Jesus. We don't know what he looks like. There's no contemporary or contemporaneous history about him except what we get in the Christian scriptures. But these men, they're all very tangible. Now, I also wanted to point out these busts of Nero, they may be unflattering because the Flavians did not like or agree with the Julio-Claudian emperors. So once these came into power, they had some control over the history, so then the history could speak badly about Nero. Now, why are there any other reasons they might speak badly about Nero? Well, the Jerusalem Talmud, contrary to accepted history, reports that Nero converted to Judaism. And Flavius Josephus actually corroborates this in a measure by saying that before that conversion, that both Nero and his wife Poppaea were very interested in learning about Judaism, and I think that Josephus even says that he says that he actually visited Nero and Poppaea. If it wasn't him, it may have been like an Agrippa or a Herod or something, but I'm pretty sure it was Josephus who says he visited Nero and Poppaea, and they were very interested in Judaism. But the Palestinian Talmud outright states that Nero converted to Judaism, and that the Jewish leaders advised Nero to go into exile because otherwise he would be assassinated. Now, the official Roman history is that Nero committed suicide. Well, if Nero did indeed convert, then his circumcision could be seen as a metaphorical suicide, because at his conversion he would cease being the Gentile Nero, and he would take on a new Hebrew name. My suspicion is that, and I should have put this here, but it's just a suspicion of mine, is that Nero is the resistance leader Simon that Titus eventually brings back to Rome to be executed there, and that this is where we get the legend of the death of the Apostle Peter, or Simon Peter, where he was supposedly crucified upside down in Rome, and that's how he was executed. Flavius Josephus is clear that the resistance leaders Simon and John, their end was it was in agreement with the strange, very specific prophecy at the end of the Gospel of John about Simon Peter and John, that Simon Peter would be led about where he did not want to go, and that John would tarry until he came back, or something like that, right? And what this demonstrates is that the Gospel of John, at least, was dependent on the works of Flavius Josephus, at least the Wars of the Jews. I'm not sure about the Antiquities. Because it's not until, you read the Gospel of John, and that's kind of strange how he singles out both Peter and John. The story's always like, these apostles were like more significant than the other apostles, but but when you read the war and the destruction of the temple in Flavius Josephus, it's very clear why Simon and John are singled out, and that's because Simon and John were the resistance leaders, like that Titus fought. Now they can all make a nice little joke about it in the Christian scriptures, by having Titus, who is also Jesus. Jesus is just a literary mask for the Emperor Titus, And that's why, whereas Hebrew scripture was either in Hebrew or Aramaic, up until you get to what I call the Christian addendum, Christians call the New Testament, or the Borit Hadashah, Messianics like to call it, but that literature is in Greek, right? They like to push that, oh look, here's a Hebrew copy or blah blah blah, but that literature is in Greek very early on. Like our earliest manuscripts of the Christian scriptures are in Greek, not in Hebrew or Aramaic. So why would you think that the Jews would accept that as scripture? So so Titus is represented by this literary figure, Jesus, and it's all backdated by about 40 years, because Titus wants to show that the events that he participated in were fulfilled in a prophecy, right? And that's the sign of Titus's divinity, that he was prophesied about, and that the things that he did were the fulfillment of that prophecy. So yeah, see, so we can close this, we can close this. Now, for these code names, Vespasian, I looked up what Vespasian means, and it says derived either from Latin vesper, meaning west or evening, or vespa, meaning wasp. And this was the name of a first century emperor, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, the founder of the Flavian dynasty. Now, here, one of the most important passages linking the Christian scriptures to the Flavian dynasty is Matthew 24. I think they call it the Little Apocalypse, or the Little Book of Revelation, or something like that. And there it says, for as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west. Well, this is like the exact opposite of the direction you would expect. You know, the sun does rise in the east and set in the west, but that's not how the Flavians came to the area. They came from the west into the east. So anyway, here it says west very prominently, right next to the word, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, definitely Titus was a son of a man, Vespasian, but in the Christian scripture, Son of Man is taken to be, you know, like a messianic term. I think mostly based on, was it the book of Daniel? Anyway, then this passage is really important, but I should talk about this at another time, because this is a key in describing the linkage between the sayings of Jesus and the Roman Flavians. So we can kill this now. And I tried to see if there was any connection with the Hebrew word for black. I didn't uncover anything, but that might be because I'm not, you know, fluent in Hebrew. Now, I did want to point out that Caesar's Messiah thesis, it suggests that the Gospels are written in such a way that they're kind of a mirror of the military exploits of Vespasian and Titus when they invaded Galilee and then Judea. Now, there are events that happen in the Gospels, and one thing the Gospels do, or at least in the sayings of Jesus, what is done over and over again, is to say that he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who has eyes to see, let him see. And then also there's a passage, something about like, we played music for you in the marketplace, but you didn't dance. Anyway, this seems to be, it seems like almost an in-your-face, like Illuminati speak kind of thing, where they're saying, they're like knocking on the heads of the readers, and they're saying, hello, McFly, hello, McFly, wake up, and they're trying to say, if you'd open your eyes, if you'd open your ears, you would see that what you're reading is really about Vespasian and Titus. It's not about some itinerant, peaceful Jewish rabbi. Now, there is the possibility, mind you, that that Titus could have converted to Judaism, or at least adopted a Hebraized or Judaized name as a like a second persona, the same way where Nero, if he converted, he would have received a new name as a convert to Judaism. Titus may have followed that practice, but then Titus may, even though he was emperor, so you would probably let the emperor have whatever he wanted, because otherwise you might be executed, right? But Titus may have just converted himself, because here he's created this this new Christian religion, and so basically he could like make up the rules. He could decide who gets to be in his club, and he could also give himself a new name if he wanted to. So as part of his new religion, like he may have considered like his Christianity, this new religion, to be the true and better or gentler, kindler Judaism, right? A new and improved Judaism. So he may have just given himself a new name, and that new name that he may have chosen may have been Yehoshua, which in Hebrew is supposed to mean like the Creator is my salvation, or the Creator saves. And and then if you anyway, it's clear that he considered himself the savior of Jerusalem, even though he was killing the Jews in Jerusalem to do that. Now, Flavius Josephus, he talks about these zealots or Sicareim or dagger men, and and how these zealots were the ones that wiped out the the Roman legion at the Beit Horon Pass, and then that's what supposedly brought on this war, even though Flavius Josephus describes all these other events which led up to the war, where it was clear that there were Roman governors or procurators or whatever who were they were provoking the Jews to war. And in discussing the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jewish tradition says two things, or gives two reasons that I can think of off the top of my head that get repeated often. One is that the reason for the destruction of Jerusalem was because of baseless hatred. Now, it's usually assumed, because Jews have the tendency to feel that their relationship with the Creator means that if some event happens, it's because of something they did, right? So when when they say baseless hatred, they take it to mean that Jews were engaging in baseless hatred towards other Jews. Now, that's definitely described in uh, Flavius Josephus's covering of the war in Judea. So, there's some historical evidence for that. But the way that Flavius Josephus also writes it, I'm starting to lose my voice here, is that the baseless hatred may have actually been the Romans against the Jews, because that's really what anti-Semitism is. It's a baseless hatred towards the Jewish people. Because if Gentiles would actually give Jewish people an opportunity to speak and to present their perspective, and would actually give them the same benefit of the doubt that they would give any non-Jewish person, then Gentiles would see that they don't really have a reason to hate Jews. But because of the invention of Christianity as this anti-Jewish religion, and it really is, because the Jews are presented as the enemy in the Christian scriptures, and then Christian tradition, it has a definite sore spot that the Jews didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And then you have Islam. It's also anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, because here they put forth this prophet, Muhammad, and the Jews didn't accept him as a prophet. Well, why should they? The Jews have a commandment in the Torah, which is way older than the Quran, that says that a prophet like Moses would have to come from Israel's brothers. And that does not describe the Arabs. So both of these world religions, Christianity and Islam, they've got real sore spots towards the Jews, because they're the innovations, they're the new message, and the Jews never received their message. Well, why should they? The Jews already have their own religion, and it's complete, and it didn't need any innovation, at least not from the Jewish perspective. So, what's left to do when the real children of Israel in the world don't accept your message? Well, then you have to paint them as demons, devils, the enemy, and you have to hate them, because they're a reminder, a daily reminder, that you're a participant in a fraud. So, a racist fraud. It's both of those ideologies, like, you take jihadists in Islam, like they're especially like for example the Palestinians, they live, breathe, and sleep killing Jews. They train their toddlers and brainwash them to dream of killing Jews, and that's how October 7th happened. This goes back to the mid-2000s, when the expulsion of Jews from Gush Katif in the Gaza Strip happened, and the Palestinian Authority had children's TV shows with Farfur the mouse and Nahul the bee and Asud the rabbit, and these were basically Disney type characters. I mean, Farfur was clearly Mickey Mouse, and they were people dressed up like Disney characters, like you would see at Disney World or Disneyland. And Farfor the mouse was the first one, Nahul the bee was the second one, and Asud the rabbit was the third one, and all three of these characters were brainwashing Palestinian children to want to kill Jews. And that's like, there were probably like 0 Muslims that had any problem with that. So, and then Christianity, it's like, oh, we love the Jewish people, but can we tell you about Jesus? Right? It's love with a condition, and that condition is that, but eventually you're going to accept Jesus. You're going to bend the knee, and you're going to affirm that Jesus is Lord. It's not unconditional love, and it's not the benefit of the doubt or the common human courtesy that you would give any non-Jewish person. It's love with a condition. And that condition is contrary to everything that Jews have believed for, thousands of years. So you're asking them to do something that's totally against their culture, their values, and their ethics. And you're saying, well, if you won't do that, well, it's because you're of the seed of Satan, you are sons of the devil, you're demons, you're the enemy. And that's Christianity, which, teaches you to love your enemies, right? So the reason Christianity is so anti-Jewish is because it was invented by these two men that were exterminating Jewish men, women, and children during that whole campaign through Galilee and Judea. And it and if you wanted, you could say it ended with the siege at Masada, but Titus didn't participate in that as far as I know. So the intention of this playlist then will be to show that various Jesus sayings actually make more sense when spoken by the Roman general turned emperor Titus, especially given that the text is in Greek. So that's what I will endeavor to do. I've probably left out some details here. Well, one might be that Nero may have been called the first Antichrist because if he was Simon the resistance leader in Jerusalem during the siege of Jerusalem, then Nero was fighting Titus. Titus, who was supposed to be Jesus the Christ. So that would definitely make him the first Antichrist. So, what does John say? That who is Antichrist? Anyone who does not acknowledge that Jesus is, the Son of God come in the flesh, or something like that. Yeah, well, Nero would not have affirmed that confession. So, I guess that would make him the first Antichrist. But anyway, the Christian myth, it's a mythological religion built up around the military exploits of Vespasian and Titus against the Jews in Galilee and Judea. And if you really wanted to read the real gospel, because note that the evangelion, is that the word? The evangel, anyway, the good news, or the good report. The Flavians are saying that their military conquest in Galilee and Judea was the good news, the good report of their military conquest, as opposed to the evil report of the 12 spies when the Israelites were entering the land of promise. So in the mind of the Flavians, they're the fix for the evil report given by the spies. Now, I want to point out too that the Roman military, we like some aspects of it are almost legendary for how systematic they were, how efficient they were as an army. Like, for example, they would literally move mountains to make the road ahead of the army as it advanced, so that when the Roman legions would move into an area, they were actually building a highway that would that could be used for commerce and traffic in the future in the empire. So that it's like they were killing two birds with one stone. Not only were they making it easier for their army to move forward, but they were also building up infrastructure for the empire. Well, people tend to think that, okay, yeah, just the Romans moved in and they didn't have any idea of what was going on or their enemy, and they had no intelligence about what they were going to be doing, right? But there's two great videos here on YouTube about the speculatores, the spies of the Roman army, and also the another video also by the Invicta account here on YouTube of the exploratores, the scouts of the Roman army. And you can see where if the Romans were using spies and scouts for their Roman army, then Vespasian and Titus would have been using spies and scouts. And if they were using spies and scouts, the spies, at least, were probably passing themselves off as Jews when they passed through Jewish settlements. So there you have an example of Romans posing as Jews. And you can even, for one, that like the apostles, the sent out ones, Caesar's Messiah suggests that these were actually Roman Roman scouts, I think, or Roman basically like officers in the Roman legions. And but then of course that would kind of contradict Simon and John, unless Simon had been a Roman, aka Nero, and John had been a Roman. And that's another thing that Josephus seems to suggest in a very subtle way, is that these resistance leaders of the Jewish resistance, they may have actually been Roman agents. Like, he seems to suggest that the Zealots and the Daggermen and the Sicareim, whereas in Judaism the spilling of blood is kind of an abhorrent thing, it describes how these Daggermen, supposedly these Jewish zealots, were going around assassinating people. And it seems a lot more likely that the Romans had assassins going around posing as Jews and assassinating people. For one, the Roman strategy is to divide and conquer. So the way to do that is to create like two polar opposites, right? So you'll have your agents gather people to these two polar opposite ideologies So on the one hand, you may have had the Herodians or the Hellenists who were bringing in, inviting Jews into paganized culture. Then at the other end, you may have had these like hyper zealous or super zealous Jews, supposedly agents bringing Jews over to their side towards a super fundamentalist form of Judaism that may have, been like ideologically overreaching. So I think a good candidate for that end of things may have been the Dead Sea Scrolls community, because there are things in the Dead Sea Scrolls that are way stricter than anything I've ever heard about in Judaism, at least today, and that I'm not sure if they even really jive with the Torah, the commandments in the Torah. But so then as you draw people to both of these poles, then you create the opposition within the people that you're trying to conquer. So because they're divided against each other, they can't focus their efforts against you. And that's where Josephus actually contradicts the Christian scripture's characterization of the Pharisees. And note that the Pharisees, the rabbis of today, are descended from the Pharisees. So a lot of that hatred, really anti-Pharisaical hatred, is really anti-Jewish hatred. and Flavius Josephus, he characterizes the Pharisees as religious moderates. Religious moderates who were trying to hold the Jewish community together during the Roman occupation. And that brings up something I failed to bring up as the other excuse in why Rome was or why Jerusalem was destroyed. The one excuse is baseless hatred, supposedly between Jews, but I think it's really the baseless hatred of the Romans against the Jews. And Flavius Josephus lays out that case when he shows that it was the Romans who were trying to provoke the Jews to war. And if they were doing it in the ways listed in Flavius Josephus, then they were almost certainly using spies and assassins to do the very same thing. But the other reason given is that the Jews did not deal wisely with the Romans. And that might be the same word as in a cunning fashion, but they didn't deal wisely with the Romans, and that's the other reason that is sometimes given for the destruction of Jerusalem. Whereas the Romans, I think it is suggested in that statement that the Romans dealt wisely or in a cunning fashion with the Jews. And that's kind of what's going on in America, without getting too political, is that it seems like the Democrats are dealing with conservatives or Republicans in a cunning fashion or wisely, but the Republicans, the conservatives, being less sophisticated than the Democrats, who they're not the kind of people who want to expend a lot of energy dealing in deceits and designs and schemes. The conservatives are not dealing wisely with the Democrats, and that's why the Democrats almost seem to have everything locked down in this country. They seem to have control, and that you just have these pockets of conservative resistance in this country. But when it comes time to um, when it comes time to have bills passed, the Democrats seem to be getting what they want, and the Republicans are not. So the same thing seems to have gone on in the years leading up to this invasion by the Romans, is that the Romans seem to be dealing wisely with the Jews, but the Jews, being Jews and probably wanting to study Torah, engage in just simple business, do their own thing, were they really equipped? And even Josephus, I think, asserts that the Jews were not ready to tackle the Roman Empire, but the Jews probably were not, in a very earthly fashion, equipped to deal with this empire that had consumed so many different cultures. So this was an army that had learned how so many different peoples behave and wage war. So it could draw from all that experience when it waged war with the Jews. Although Josephus does say, I think, that there were times when the way Jews did battle, it could still be surprising to the Roman legions. And that's to be expected, because like Jewish culture is so alien to most of the world. So anyway, I think we can stop here. So what I want to do is, despite all of the naysayers in the historical Jesus industry, all these scholars who put so much of their credibility, they bank so much of their credibility on their theories that Jesus was a hippie, or Jesus was a communist, or Jesus was a Palestinian freedom fighter, or Jesus was a Hellenistic Jewish rabbi, or this question mark Jesus over here, he becomes a paper doll, where the historical Jesus industry just dresses him up to be whatever will appeal to a certain demographic. He's literally like a literary idol, where you would adorn and dress up the idol to conform to your vision of whatever God you worshipped or wanted to sell to the people that came to your marketplace. Whereas these men, you look at busts of Vespasian, most of them look the same. Most of the busts of Nero look the same, although I think scholars are realizing that the Flavians painted Nero in a very bad light, both through history and through art. And it was probably because Nero was seen as a traitor, because he converted to Judaism and left being emperor, went into exile, and probably into exile in Jerusalem, because in the place in the Jerusalem Talmud where it says that Nero converted to Judaism, it says that Nero was in Jerusalem and he fired arrows in 4 directions. And I'm not sure if it said that all the arrows came back or something, but Nero's conclusion from that was that the Romans wanted to make war, and they wanted to blame the war on him, on Nero. So that's another reason I think that Nero was Simon the Resistance Fighter. Later known in church tradition as Simon Peter, who had such faith problems and doubted, and but then later became the rock of the church for confessing that Titus was Jesus, the Messiah, according to the Christian scriptures. Of course, Nero was, as Simon, Nero was captured and he was in Titus's custody during that whole trip back to Rome. So it may have actually transpired that Nero may have, under duress, confessed that Titus was the Messiah, the son of the man who would have been the Roman state god at the time, Vespasian. Who knows? We don't know. So to wrap up here, I think you should watch these two videos about the speculatories and the exploratories, and understand what was really going on when Vespasian and Titus made war in Galilee and Judea, and how they were probably already beginning to write the Gospels, the same way that Marcus Aurelius was pictured as writing his Stoic philosophy when he was out in the field as a Roman general himself. So anyway, I'll stop here, and then in succeeding videos I would like to treat individual passages of the Christian scriptures and show how they are much more applicable and make a lot a lot more sense when they come out of the mouth of Titus than if they come out of the mouth of a itinerant Jewish rabbi, supposedly.